When most people think of the Middle Ages, they imagine a world of heroic knights, fair maidens, and majestic castles set against rolling green hills. It's an image shaped by fairy tales, fantasy novels, and Hollywood epics. But the truth, that picturesque vision is about as historically accurate as a dragon flying over Buckingham Palace. If you were dropped into the real medieval world, chances are you'd be dead or begging to go back within the first 24 hours. Let's start by busting the biggest myth. You wouldn't be a knight. Unless you were born into nobility, a tiny fraction of the population. You wouldn't have a shining suit of armor, a loyal warhorse, or a seat at any royal table. You'd be a peasant. That's the cold, mud-caked reality. Over 90% of medieval people were peasants, bound to their lord's land and living lives of back-breaking labor from sunrise to sunset. Forget leather boots and warm cloaks. Most peasants wore the same scratchy wool tunic every day, often riddled with lice and soaked in sweat and dirt. Your feet? Probably bare or wrapped in rags. And your living quarters? A smoky one-room hut shared with your entire family, sometimes even livestock for warmth. But it's not just about discomfort, it's about survival. Modern life has spoiled us with central heating, clean water, and medicine. Take all of that away and throw in a diet of moldy bread and sour ale, and you start to see the problem. You wouldn't just be uncomfortable, you'd be in danger. Let's talk hygiene, or the shocking lack thereof. You'd wake up on a straw mattress infested with fleas, in a room filled with the stench of sweat, waste, smoke, and animals. Showers didn't exist. Soap was a luxury. And the idea of brushing your teeth? Completely foreign. The average person might bathe once a year. Diseases festered in every corner, and you wouldn't even know what most of them were. There were no antibiotics, no painkillers, no antiseptics, only superstition and guesswork. You might think, okay, but at least I'd have food, right? Not so fast. The medieval diet was about quantity, not quality, and even that depended on the season. In times of poor harvest, which happened often, famine swept through entire regions. You'd mostly eat coarse bread made from rye or barley with the occasional vegetable or weak broth. Meat? Only on rare occasions. And if you did get meat, it might already be going rancid. Preservation methods were crude, and spices to mask the taste were expensive. Even water, the most basic necessity, could be lethal. Rivers and wells were often contaminated with human and animal waste. That's why ale or weak beer became a common drink, not for pleasure, but for survival. Imagine having to drink alcohol every day just to avoid getting sick. Now imagine what that did to the average person's health, energy, and mental clarity. But perhaps the most jarring difference between now and then was violence. The medieval world was brutally hierarchical and unforgiving. If you were accused of a crime, you didn't get a lawyer, you got torture. Trial by ordeal, holding a hot iron or being thrown into a river to see if you'd float, was often how guilt was determined. Punishments were public and horrific. Beheadings, hangings, burnings, and worse were meant to deter crime through fear. There were no human rights, no appeals, and definitely no mercy. And let's not forget the church's grip on daily life. Religion wasn't a matter of personal faith. It was law, culture, and fear rolled into one. The church dictated your calendar, your social structure, even your sex life. Say the wrong thing, believe the wrong idea, or cross the wrong priest, and you could find yourself branded a heretic. That often meant imprisonment, torture, or a fiery end. Education, literacy, only for the clergy and the elite. As a commoner, you likely couldn't read or write your own name. You'd rely entirely on oral tradition, superstition, and hearsay for knowledge about the world, and most of it would be wrong. A common cold could be mistaken for demonic possession. A solar eclipse might spark panic about the end of the world. And if you were a woman, your life was even more restricted. Your rights were almost non-existent, your value measured in dowries or childbearing ability. You could be married off in your early teens to a man twice your age and expected to manage a household and give birth repeatedly, often without surviving past your 30s. Medical care during childbirth was minimal and infection was common. Now imagine all of that, and then add war. Borders were in constant flux. Raids, invasions, and battles could erupt at any time. As a peasant, you'd be unarmed and untrained, yet expected to defend your village with nothing more than a pitchfork. If enemy soldiers arrived, you could be slaughtered, enslaved, or see your home burned to the ground. So let's do a reality check. You wake up in a smoky hovel next to a pig. You haven't bathed in months. Your food is moldy. You're weak from malnutrition. The water will probably kill you. There's no doctor. You can't read. You might be arrested and tortured for reasons you don't understand. And somewhere in the distance, drums of war echo in the hills. Still want to be a knight? This was only the beginning of medieval life. And we're not even into the diseases, the plagues, or the superstition-fueled paranoia of witch trials and bloodletting. The romanticized version of the Middle Ages is just that, a fantasy. If you think you'd thrive in that world, think again. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into the day-to-day experience of a medieval peasant. From food gathering and farming routines to brutal weather and feudal obligations, you'll see exactly why 24 hours in that world would be a living nightmare for anyone born in the modern age. So you've survived the initial culture shock, barely. But now it's dawn, and your day as a medieval peasant truly begins. No more fantasizing about dragons and quests. This is the real Middle Ages, and it's about to grind you down, hour by hour. Let's start with waking up. It's not the soothing buzz of an alarm clock or a sunrise lamp that pulls you from sleep. It's the freezing cold. Your one-room wattle and daub hut is drafty, smoky, and damp. You're lying on a straw mattress full of fleas, covered by a wool blanket that hasn't been washed in months, and you're surrounded by your entire family, because privacy isn't a thing. Oh, and maybe a goat or a chicken, too. Animals often slept indoors for warmth and protection. There's no time to yawn and stretch. The rooster crows, and that's your cue to start the day. A day ruled entirely by survival. You start with the most critical and repetitive task, food production. If it's spring or summer, you're in the fields from sunrise until sundown. That means tilling soil with a wooden plow pulled by a half-starved ox, planting seeds, or harvesting barley and wheat by hand. No tractors, no fertilizers. Just raw muscle, primitive tools, and blind faith in the weather. If you collapse from exhaustion, no one cares. The Lord still demands his share. And if you don't meet your quota, you're in debt, which could mean losing your land or even going to jail. In the fall and winter, the labor changes but doesn't stop. You're preserving what little food you've grown, slaughtering livestock, if you have any, fixing thatched roofs, gathering firewood, and patching tools. If a tool breaks and you can't repair it, you're screwed. Buying a new one costs more than you earn in months. And speaking of earnings, most peasants didn't use money at all. You worked your lord's land in exchange for the right to live on it. This system, known as feudalism, was a trap. You were legally tied to the land and the noble who owned it. You couldn't just leave and find a better job. That wasn't allowed. You weren't free. And what about food? You might think your hard labor would be rewarded with a hearty meal. Think again. Breakfast, if you're lucky, is a chunk of stale bread and a mug of weak beer or watery porridge. No coffee, no sugar. Maybe some onions or a dried apple if it's harvest season. Lunch is a cold, greasy stew, likely the same thing every day. And dinner is just a repeat. There's almost no meat unless you hunt illegally on noble land, a crime punishable by death or mutilation. Your diet is basically carbs, carbs, and more carbs, with a side of malnutrition. And forget cutlery. You eat with your hands, or use a wooden spoon. Plates are rare. Many people use stale bread trenchers that absorb the juices of food and were eaten last or thrown to dogs. Not exactly the royal feast you'd imagined. Next comes personal hygiene, or the lack of it. After meals, there's no running water to wash your hands. You might have a communal bucket of murky rainwater or a filthy stream nearby. Bathing is a luxury most can't afford. Soap, made from animal fat and ash, is scratchy and rare. Public bathhouses exist in cities, but they're also used as brothels and considered morally dubious. Most peasants go months without bathing, maybe washing their face and hands occasionally in a cold stream. You relieve yourself in a hole outside or a bucket inside. Forget privacy, forget flushing. In cities, people often tossed waste out of their windows into the street. "Garde l'eau," they'd shout, a French phrase meaning, "watch out for the water," right before dumping urine and feces onto the road below. Disease thrives in this environment. You don't know what bacteria is, but your body feels it. Cuts get infected. Your gums bleed from scurvy. Your joints ache. Your teeth rot. You might live with chronic pain from a bad back, parasites in your gut, or untreated injuries. But guess what? You still have to work. No sick days, no hospitals, just superstition, folk remedies, and the hope you survive the year. At some point during the day, you'll be expected to attend church. Even in the middle of planting or harvest, the church controls your schedule. Holy days, fasts, and festivals dictate when you can work, what you can eat, and when you must pray. You likely don't understand Latin, the language of the Mass, but you kneel, cross yourself, and murmur along because not doing so could raise suspicions. Heresy is deadly. And don't expect a moment of spiritual comfort either. The church preaches about hell more than heaven, and your life is a constant reminder of your unworthiness. You're told to suffer humbly, to obey your Lord and priest, and to accept your role in God's divine order. Your only hope for joy is in the afterlife, if you behave. As the sun sets, your workday finally ends, but your responsibilities don't. You repair tools, spin wool, patch clothing, sharpen scythes, or care for animals. The fire must be kept alive. Water must be hauled from the stream. Children must be tended to. If you're a woman, your duties double. You manage the home, cook, clean, raise children, and may still be expected to help in the fields. And then night falls. It's pitch black outside. No streetlights, no lanterns. Maybe a single candle or a smoky fire illuminates your hovel. If a storm rolls in or wolves howl nearby, you shiver under your blanket and pray they don't come too close. And just when you think you can rest, remember, you're probably not sleeping well. You're cold. You're sore. You're itchy from lice. You're paranoid about thieves or soldiers. And you know tomorrow will be the same, if not worse. There's no vacation, no weekends, no escape. So next time you fantasize about living in a simpler time, think again. The medieval world didn't care about your comfort. You weren't the hero of the story. You were just trying to survive. If backbreaking labor, starvation, and freezing nights didn't finish you off in medieval times, then something else almost certainly would. Disease. You've survived a full day of medieval peasant life, but your body is already showing signs of breaking down. You're hungry, weak, filthy, and sleep-deprived. Now imagine adding a splitting headache, a festering wound, or bloody coughs into the mix. Welcome to the medical hellscape of the Middle Ages. Let's make one thing clear. You wouldn't get medical help. You'd get medical guesswork. There were no hospitals as we know them today. Sure, Monastic infirmaries and barber surgeons existed, but the vast majority of people had no access to trained professionals. Even the experts didn't truly understand how the human body worked. The dominant theory of medicine was based on the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If you were sick, it meant your humors were out of balance. The solution? Not antibiotics, not bed rest, but bloodletting, cutting your veins or using leeches to drain illness. Feeling weak and feverish? You'd probably be bled until you fainted. Suffering from a stomachache? You might be given a laxative made from boiled herbs and animal dung. Got a headache? You might be told your brain was overheated and that you need to sniff vinegar or be trepanned. That is, have a hole drilled in your skull to release the pressure. Even worse, most ailments were interpreted as divine punishment or demonic possession. A cold might be blamed on sin. A seizure, possession, skin lesions, a mark of the devil. Exorcisms were common and often brutal. You might be forced to fast, whipped to cleanse your soul, or even chained up. Now let's talk about the diseases themselves. You probably imagine the Black Death as the ultimate medieval killer, and you'd be right. In the 14th century, the bubonic plague wiped out up to 60% of Europe's population. That's not an exaggeration. Entire towns were erased. And here's the chilling part: no one knew what caused it. Doctors wore terrifying beaked masks filled with herbs, thinking they could filter the miasma, bad air, responsible for the disease. But in reality, the plague was spread by fleas on rats. No one understood that. Hygiene, already abysmal, became worse as people fled cities, abandoning their sick and dying family members. Imagine you wake up with a sore throat and a small bump in your groin. Within hours, the bump becomes a painful black boil. Fever kicks in. Your lymph nodes swell. You begin vomiting blood. In a few days, you're dead, choking on your own fluids. This was a normal outcome. There was no cure, no safety, and no way of knowing when the plague would return. But the plague was just the headline act. There were plenty of supporting killers. Smallpox disfigured and killed children by the thousands. Tuberculosis, known as consumption, caused slow, agonizing deaths, wasting the body over months or years. Leprosy was common and terrifying, causing skin lesions, nerve damage, and social ostracization. Ergot poisoning from moldy bread could cause hallucinations, gangrene, and death. Dysentery, typhoid, and cholera ran rampant through filthy towns and villages, spread by contaminated water and food. If you were a woman, things got even worse. Childbirth was a deadly gamble. There were no hospitals, no trained midwives in many rural areas, and absolutely no sanitation. If you went into labor, you'd likely be assisted by other women from your village with no medical training. If the baby was breech, if the umbilical cord was wrapped around its neck, or if the placenta didn't come out cleanly, you were done for. Infection, especially puerperal fever, was common, and many women died within days. Mother's bed, they called it, a euphemism for the grave. Some villages had death rates for mothers that rivaled those of battlefields. And yet, women were expected to give birth over and over again just to ensure one or two children survived infancy. And speaking of infants, child mortality was horrifyingly high. Up to 50% of children didn't survive past the age of 5. Many died from diarrhea, pneumonia, or infected wounds. If you were born in the Middle Ages, your odds of reaching adulthood were less than half. No one celebrated a child's birthday with the same joy we do today. It was seen as a small miracle if they made it past infancy. Now, let's say you're one of the lucky ones who survives illness. Maybe your wound didn't kill you. Maybe your fever broke. But that doesn't mean you're safe. You're likely disabled, scarred, or chronically ill. A broken bone could heal improperly, leaving you with a permanent limp or twisted limb. You'd get no therapy, no surgery, just scorn and suffering. Disabilities were often viewed as a curse from God, or worse, a sign of evil. Many were abandoned, shunned, or even accused of witchcraft. Mental illness? That was completely misunderstood. Depression, schizophrenia, anxiety, all seen as weakness, sin, or madness. The cures? Isolation, exorcism, or confinement in a cell. Some were even burned as heretics or witches if their behavior was too strange to explain. And don't think your social status saved you. Nobles had access to better food and maybe a physician, but those physicians still relied on outdated methods like purging, blistering, or astrology. Kings died young. Queens died in childbirth. No one was truly safe. This brings us to perhaps the most horrifying truth of all. You wouldn't know why you were dying. There's no understanding of germs, no concept of sanitation, and no effective medicine. You'd suffer in confusion, fear, and agony, surrounded by others who could offer only prayer, superstition, or crude folk remedies. So if you think a sore throat, a toothache, or a stomach bug is no big deal today, remember, in the Middle Ages, any one of those could be your death sentence. If disease hasn't ended you, starvation hasn't crippled you, and medieval medicine hasn't killed you in Section 3, then congratulations. You've made it further than most. But don't breathe easy just yet, because now comes the final trio of torment that would grind down even the strongest modern soul: war, law, and superstition. Let's begin with war, because in medieval times, war wasn't just something you read about. It came knocking at your door, often literally. You're a peasant, unarmed and untrained, just trying to survive and maybe raise your family. But your lord has a dispute with a neighboring baron, or a distant king wants to press his claim over your region. Or maybe the Mongols, the Ottomans, or the Teutonic Knights are on the move. No matter the reason, the consequences for you are the same: violence, conscription, destruction. You could be drafted into a local militia with no real training, handed a rusty spear, and marched off to war, away from your land, your family, and your only chance of survival. If you refuse, it's treason. If you run, it's desertion. Both are punishable by death. But even if you stay home, you're not safe. Armies in the Middle Ages didn't travel with supply chains. They lived off the land, which is a polite way of saying they stole everything in sight. Your crops, taken; your animals, slaughtered; your home, burned to the ground; your wife or daughter, at risk of rape and enslavement. War wasn't noble or glorious, it was chaos, and civilians always paid the highest price. And if you survived the fighting, you might still die from infected wounds, starvation during the long marches, or friendly fire in the confusion of battle. There were no medics, no stretchers, no rehabilitation. If you were lucky, you might crawl back home missing a limb and be forced to beg for the rest of your short life. Next comes the law, and let's just say, you wouldn't want to be caught on the wrong side of it. Medieval law was a mess, inconsistent, brutal, and deeply unfair. Justice depended more on your status than on facts. If a noble accused a peasant of stealing, guess who the court believed? And court might be an overly generous word. In many regions, justice was handled locally, by your lord or a village elder, often with no written laws, no defense, and no appeal. Trials weren't based on evidence. Instead, people underwent trial by ordeal, brutal tests meant to determine guilt by divine judgment. You might be ordered to carry a red-hot iron for several feet, or have your hands plunged into boiling water. If your wounds healed cleanly after 3 days, you were innocent. If not, you were guilty. Spoiler: few people passed. And punishments? They were public, humiliating, and designed to be a lesson for all. Steal a loaf of bread? You might have a hand cut off. Gossip too much? You might be gagged and chained in the public square. Accused of witchcraft? You could be tortured until you confessed, and then burned at the stake. Executions were entertainment. People brought their children to watch hangings and beheadings. The condemned were often paraded through the streets. Criminals weren't just punished. They were put on display to feed the fear of rebellion or disobedience. But perhaps the most haunting killer of all was superstition. You've made it this far. You've avoided war, survived sickness, and kept your nose clean. But one bad dream, one odd birthmark, one sick cow in the village, and suddenly, you're the reason everything's going wrong. Medieval people lived in a world drenched in fear. Without science, logic, or education to explain natural events, they turned to the only thing they had, folklore and religion. If it rained too little, it was God's punishment. If a baby was born deformed, it was the devil's work. If a neighbor's cow died mysteriously, someone had to be cursed. That someone could easily be you. You might be accused of witchcraft for making herbal remedies, for having a birthmark, or even for being a widow living alone. And what happened to witches? They were arrested, tortured until they confessed, and then executed, often by burning or hanging. Superstition also controlled daily life. People avoided certain roads at night for fear of ghosts or demons. Children were told tales of forest spirits and blood-drinking beasts. And it wasn't just peasant belief. Even kings relied on astrologers, relics, and omens. Major political decisions could be influenced by a solar eclipse or the discovery of a miraculous chicken born with 2 heads. Your worldview would be shaped by fear and obedience, not curiosity, not progress. If you asked too many questions, you risked being labeled a heretic. And in a time when heresy could lead to death, most people stayed quiet. Even something as simple as falling in love could be dangerous. Marriage wasn't about romance. It was about alliances, land, and survival. Marrying without your Lord's permission could get you punished. Sleeping with the wrong person could get you flogged. Or worse, forced to pay penance before the whole community. Adultery, especially for women, was seen as a grievous sin that could result in beatings, disfigurement, or banishment. So let's review. You've been starved, worked to the bone, exposed to lethal diseases, and nearly executed for crimes you didn't commit. You've watched loved ones die from plagues, war, or childbirth. You've lived in fear of the church, the state, and your neighbors. And the truth is, you were never safe. Not in the field, not in your hut, not even in your own mind. The Middle Ages were not a time of freedom and adventure. They were a dark, brutal, and unforgiving era, where every breath was a victory and every sunrise was uncertain. To survive even 24 hours in that world required unimaginable strength, luck, and submission. So next time someone tells you they wish they lived in simpler times, ask them this. Would you really trade comfort, medicine, safety, and freedom for a life of filth, fear, and fire? You wouldn't last 24 hours. And honestly, most people back then didn't either.